For today's objective, we are going to discover how engineers use controlled force to solve problems. So let's get started. Okay, in last week's lessons, we talked about predicting which pull is stronger and how size can play into this. Between Mater, the tow truck, and Mac, the transporter truck, Mac can have stronger pulls because he's bigger. In this example with Lightning McQueen versus Mater, which push will be stronger? Well, it's going to be Lightning McQueen because he can go a lot faster than Mater. So we know that the faster an object moves or the larger an object is, the stronger it pushes on something when it bumps into it. So factors like how big something is and how fast something is can affect force. So today we're going to take that concept and look at how it affects everyday life. I want you to think about whenever you see these orange traffic cones around. Why do we have traffic cones even? It's because they're used as safety measures. When a car is driving into something, you might put traffic cones, because the traffic cone is a controlled force. Okay, let me explain. When a car is driving and they put up orange traffic cones around it, this is to prevent the car from crashing into something important. So for example, think about when you're at school and we have the orange traffic cones in the parking lot. When all the adults come to pick up their kids in the parking lot, we put cones out. This is to make sure, in case a car is driving too fast, that first they bump into the cone. And when they push into the cone pushes back. Those are there, so it's better for the cars to push into the cone than to push into any kids, right? So in this picture, when the person is motioning for the car to back up, we have cones surrounding the car so that if the car accidentally goes in the wrong direction, the car is going to push against the cones are going to push back and guide the driver the correct way. Another example of a controlled force are these poles. You might notice poles in front of buildings, in front of restaurants, maybe in front of homes along the street. This is because if cars are driving and they accidentally go too fast into the wrong direction, they're going to crash into the poles first. This protects the building, it protects the restaurant, it protects the homes. Okay, when the car is pushing into the poles push back and push the car back into the street instead of, if there was no barrier here, they would just crash into the building and potentially wreck the building or harm any pedestrians who might be walking that way. So in this way, engineers use force to help solve a problem of an oncoming car. So these are some more examples of controlled force via poles you might have seen. So here they are in front of some shops, in front of some restaurants, or in front of some other properties. Engineers have even designed flexible poles so that when the car backs into it, it doesn't damage the car. The other examples I showed you before were stiff poles, and so it might damage the car when it bumps into them, but there's flexible versions of these made of rubber so that it just flexibly bends back when it gets pushed, and then this pole would push back on the car, leading the car forward. We can use the poles on impacting cars to help them change direction. So if a car is driving around this curve, maybe the driver loses control, goes off to the side and hits the pole. The pole is pushing back against the car, causing the car to change direction back onto the road instead of into a ditch or into the wildlife. So those are some examples of controlled force in everyday life. Now when you're out and about, see how many poles you see around. Those are all there to protect from hard pushes. Let's talk about another example that is in nature or natural disasters. So let's say there's a very tall, steep mountain, and mountains are made of rocks, and there's a small rock, and it's rolling down the hill. What kind of impact do you think it's going to have on these trees down below when it hits them? So this is a small rock. It's going down the hill, and when it gets to the bottom, it stops when it gets to the tree. The tree is a larger item than the rock. It has a bigger force, so that when the small rock hits it, it has the force of coming maybe slowly or quickly all the way down the hill, but the tree is bigger and can stop the rock from going any further. But what if it's a big rock coming down the hill or the mountain? And even if it's going slow, it's still really big, and maybe it's going fast. And when it comes down the mountain and it's coming toward the trees, maybe this time, because the rock is so big and it was going down so fast, it can knock down the tree. So that's a problem, right? We don't want rock slides to be knocking down trees, or worse, if there's people below the mountain or homes below the mountain. So that's where engineers come in. Okay, engineers go and investigate huge rocks that might fall later and figure out what they can do to prevent it from hurting people. So some rock slide prevention. They put up these nets, these concrete slabs, these fences to push back against falling rocks. Notice these next time you're out and about on highways that involve steep hills or mountains surrounding you. Notice if there's concrete slabs on the sides, or nets or fences or anything like that. This is so it can prevent things from falling. If there's a falling rock sliding down, the fence is going to push back against the rock and hopefully stop it from getting into the street or landing on your car. Okay, our third example. Have you ever seen one of these before? Whoa. We call this an avalanche. An avalanche is when a huge lumps of snow are going down hills really, really fast. And when the speed and size of that snow comes down the mountain, it can have the power to break down the trees, or even worse, maybe people who are nearby or homes who are down below. So we need a controlled force to help prevent avalanches. So these engineers have built in these devices to help push back against the snow and keep it in place. Here's some more avalanche control. You can see that there are more fences and poles along the mountain to help push back against the snow if it should start to fall down the hill. There's also avalanche control in a way of setting off smaller controlled avalanches. So using explosives to set up small avalanches when the slopes are empty to help prevent even bigger ones in the future. So here's a picture of the engineers and the rangers using a bulldozer to clear out the way of a controlled avalanche. So for our activity today, now that you know all these things about force, you know that it's a push, you know that it's a pull, you know that it can, that when you apply force, you can cause things to change direction, and you know that engineers use force to help solve problems. So I want you to become an engineer yourself and imagine that you are the engineer in control of a rock slide or an avalanche project. Design something that would change the direction of the falling rock or the falling snow and how you would help solve the problem.